This is Horizons Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump launches his long-awaited Board of Peace to work with the United Nations. But some global leaders fear he is trying to sideline the international body. Asian stocks rise and the dollar weakens against emerging market currencies as global investors seek a rotation out of U.S. assets amid policy unpredictability and geopolitical risks. And ahead, we will still be in Davos and hear from the Egyptian International Cooperation Minister, Saudi Arabia's Finance Minister, as well as the kingdom's Economy and Planning Minister, plus CEO of Mistral AI. It's just gone past 9 a.m. across the Emirates. 7 a.m. here in Johannesburg. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in for Jumana Bersechi. And wow, what a week it has been. Happy Friday to you. And if you take a look at where the markets are shaping up this Friday, perhaps some people are actually waking up a bit happier today. We are seeing U.S. equity futures a bit more positive today, as you can see there, extending some of the gains that we did see continuing on throughout the day on Thursday. But really, focus and extended trading has been quite interesting, because we did get some weaker than expected outlook from Intel that has putting a bit of a damper on the AI tech-fueled rally that we had seen post the Greenland thawing, as we would call it, earlier in the week. But still, we are seeing a bit of positivity feeding in to global equities and U.S. equities, as you can see there. The U.S. 10-year yield looking unchanged right now, though, of course, we are paying very close attention to this. We did just get a BOJ decision not too long ago. We are waiting to hear from Governor Ueda, but still later in the day, we are still going to get PMI data in the U.S. to potentially get some clues on the path for the U.S. economy. That has, of course, been a big focus of discussion throughout the day in Davos. But right now, the U.S. 10-year yield at 4.25% there. I also have the MSCI EM currency index up on the board there. We were mentioning we've been seeing a weaker dollar. We are seeing broadly EM currencies rallying right now. We've seen currencies like the Brazilian real and also the Colombian and Chilean pesos doing stronger against the dollar. Also, I'm sitting here in South Africa, so I have to point out that the South African rand hit a fresh three-year high against the dollar. So perhaps a weaker dollar has been a bit of a boon for some of these EM currencies. And finally, as we have been throughout the whole week, paying attention to precious metals, spot gold on the board there, up just over 0.4% there. Silver is also up, but notable for gold, as you can see, inching ever so closely to that $5,000 an ounce point. And again, hitting another intraday record on this Friday. So still, it feels like a bid for safe havens is still permeating throughout the markets on this Friday. Now, let's check in, though, on how markets in Asia are faring. It's been a busy day for Winnie Xu, who is standing by in our Hong Kong studio. Winnie, you've been watching closely to what's been happening in Japan. Walk us through what you're seeing.
Yeah, morning, Jen, and happy BOJ Day. Now we are seeing that the Japanese yen weakening a bit and stocks fluctuating. The topic still holding on to its gains after the Bank of Japan kept its rates steady. Now, like you mentioned, all eyes will be on that pressure to come from Ueda, and we will be watching how he's going to address this recent bond sell-off and his tone around that outlook for inflation and for rates. Now, in terms of the decision, it came with a bit of a hawkish tilt because the Bank of Japan actually raised its inflation outlook, and that is signaling that more rate hikes are likely going to come lower down the path. However, some did also raise some concerns in terms of potentially a bit more dovish tone to come at the presser, given that the latest inflation read actually showed a slowdown, first time in 4 months. So that's giving the Bank of Japan a bit more room to breathe, and that they might likely take their time in terms of that rate hike. So we'll be closely watching out for what Ueda is going to say, especially now that Takaichi has dissolved her lower house. Now, flip the board and take a quick look at the broader Asia market, because overall it is still up, just driven by these easing geopolitical tensions. However, seeing Kospi flipping into the red and the Chinese stocks also losing some momentum after local media said that China is likely going to set a lower economic growth target compared to last year. Back to you, Jen.
Winnie Xu in Hong Kong. Busy day for Winnie. Thanks so much. We'll check back in with you in just a bit. Let's get back to our top story, though. U.S. President Donald Trump's Board of Peace has launched in Davos to a muted response amid concerns from key allies. The event saw fewer than 20 countries in attendance, with many of the world's influential leaders from big economies absent. However, downplaying the divisions and controversies surrounding the board, Trump declared the event a success.
Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. You know, I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it, but there's tremendous potential in the United Nations.
For more on this, we're joined by Horizons anchor Jumana Bersachi, who has been in Davos all week and is there for us now. Jumana, the absentees were as notable as the attendees. Give us a sense of what stood out to you from this whole event.
Yeah, well, for the Board of Peace signing yesterday, it actually took place right behind me. It's very early in the morning now, but there were throngs of people waiting to get in because it actually was a moment in history. Nothing like this has actually happened before. Yes, there's been a lot of controversy around the establishment of this Board of Peace, but it seems as though the Trump administration is really pushing on with trying to move to phase 2 of what was a multiple phase ceasefire agreed to a couple of months ago. One of the elements is the establishment of this oversight committee, which is the Board of Peace. And of course, other elements include the establishment of a self-governing, technocratic Palestinian Authority. Key to that, obviously, disarmament of Hamas and then reconstruction. So yesterday, throughout the ceremony, what you saw was Jared Kushner, special envoy and advisor to the president, present a series of slides about their greater vision for Gaza. It felt somewhat surreal, obviously, the juxtaposition between what they want Gaza to look like versus the reality on the ground now, which is essentially that it is filled and piled up with rubble. But they are presenting a plan forward, and of course many questions about how we're going to get there. As for the Board of Peace itself, shortly before the signing ceremony took place, the White House released a list of names of the countries that had signed up to be founding members of it. It's about 25 countries, a lot of them from the Middle East and Asia. None of the sub-Saharan African leaders were actually invited to be on the Board of Peace, which is notable in itself. About 50 invitations were sent out. Most of the European leaders declined to participate, and mainly because it is unclear at this point what exactly the reach of this Board of Peace is. It was supposed to be founded for oversight and peacekeeping in Gaza, but in the charter that was released a couple of days ago, it seemed to have branched into broader ambitions and to become a global peacekeeping mission, which would essentially compete with the United Nations. So we'll see whether the wording on that charter actually gets reworked. Yesterday, during his comments, President Trump did mention that the peacekeeping body was not meant to compete with the UN. And then there's also been other controversy around who exactly was invited to be on the board. President Putin was invited, for example. And of course, he's been waging war in Ukraine for the last 4 years. So what peacemaking skills or credibility is he going to have really to be part of that board? And then the final point is that $1 billion fee that has been touted as well to become a permanent member. So there's still many G7 nations that are reluctant to sign on. But again, a historic moment. And also, I will say as well, for the first time, you actually got Palestinian voices being represented on an international scale. So that was quite notable because a few of them did speak at the signing ceremony yesterday.
Yeah, and Jumana, I mean, that point on sub-Saharan Africa is very interesting, especially if you consider Trump putting out that he's resolved 8 wars, some of which are, as he claims, on the African continent. Let's just talk about the other big event for the week, Jumana, and that is, of course, the issue of Greenland. After the agreement between NATO Secretary Rutte and Trump, we've gotten some more details. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, that's right. So Bloomberg Television actually secured an interview with the NATO Secretary, Mark Rutte. That was one day after they announced this framework deal for Greenland. Let's take a listen to what he said about what was discussed.
We didn't discuss at all about that issue. So we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
So that was the NATO Secretary General speaking to Bloomberg, and I think he went at lengths to really emphasize the fact that this was not about sovereignty, it was about security. It is about security of the Arctic region. That is their focus. And the original NATO statement actually said that they want to beef up security to ensure that Russia and China do not get a foothold on the territory, and that territorial sovereignty, integrity had not been discussed. And indeed, I thought it was quite interesting overnight. Even the Greenland PM said that they were not aware of the contents of what was discussed in that framework deal. So again, details is still quite scant. We don't exactly understand what the framework is that they're working on. But what we do know, if you go back historically, 1951, there is an agreement that states that the U.S. can have military bases on the territory so long as there's approval from both Denmark and Greenland. And perhaps there may be a concession there for the U.S. to beef up its military presence. Possibly the Greenlanders said that they may be open to establishing a larger NATO base there. But the takeaway from all of this, and we're not here specifically to talk about Greenland, but I think the Europeans after this week definitely feel like a rift has opened up once again in that transatlantic alliance. They cannot be so dependent on the U.S. for defense. And a lot of the conversations here have been actually directed at Europe. Criticism, self-criticism. The German Chancellor yesterday was talking about the need for further cooperation within Europe. They really need to build up an economic powerhouse. And even Ukrainian President Zelensky had very harsh words to say about Europeans, saying the time has come to act. There's been a lot of words, but not a lot of action. So actually, if you look back at the course of this week, yes, President Trump created a lot of headlines, but I think European leaders really have to go away and think about how they can come together cohesively as a united bloc to think about some of these external threats and move towards what Macron coins as strategic autonomy.
Yeah, quite a week it's been for you and the team there in Davos. Chimana Bersetchi, thanks so much for joining us and for bringing us all of your reporting. Now, our next guest calls the Japanese bond sell-off this week as politically driven volatility. We speak to Sree Kochugovindan next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jennifer Zapasaja in Johannesburg. Joining us now is Sree Kochugovindan, Senior Research Economist at Aberdeen Investments, to talk through what's been quite a week for markets. Sree, thanks so much for being with us. Let's just start with the BOJ, because that has really been the story of the past few hours. We did see the BOJ holding rates as expected, but really what's going to be key is what we hear from Governor Ueda. When you think about the events of the past few days, the volatility that the markets have seen, a bit of stabilization now, what about the outlook matters most for markets and from where you sit?
Yes, I think what we've seen, one of the key factors for the BOJ will be the outlook for inflation. And they've made that clear in today's forecast pack. They've raised the inflation forecast, just nudged it higher across 2026 and 2027. But we've also seen some inflation data out overnight that shows that December inflation actually took a step lower. And that's partly because of subsidies. There's also the base effect of food and energy prices unwinding. And that's something that's going to persist for a number of months, that disinflationary trend in terms of headline inflation. I think those factors are quite important for the BOJ because they have said we will, if our forecast materializes, then we will be in a position to raise rates. So in terms of timing, given today the inflation print overnight, it still seems that it's going to be a very gradual pace for the BOJ to hike. But we will look to the press conference as well and the comments there and see if there's any further steer. He's often very neutral, especially considering there's an election campaign in the background. So I'm not expecting any sort of clarity in terms of timing. But the inflation outlook, but also with a nod to the bond markets as well, potentially. And we'll be looking out for any comments on the yen and the recent JGB volatility as well.
Well, and I was going to mention the election because what, if any, volatility can the BOJ even telegraph if this election is so forthcoming?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. They never comment on politics. They never comment on fiscal policy. It's something that they will have to factor in. I'll be interested to see if any of the supplementary budget features in the comments, because we have this, we have a couple of drivers here. We have a budget that focused on the cost of living crisis. The campaign is focusing on the cost of living crisis. So all of this is leading towards policies that are going to be driving inflation lower. However, on the other hand, how is that going to be funded? So that's a real dilemma for the bond market as well. So I think in the coming weeks, it's very difficult to do anything during an election campaign. But after that, it will be interesting to see if there's any intervention from a coordinated path from the BOJ and the Ministry of Finance. Usually they hold that off for a disorderly move in the bond markets, and we certainly saw that this week.
Do you think markets, Sree, because this also sort of speaks to what we're seeing with the Fed, there is a bit of political pressure that these central banks are being dealt with, but at the same time they're having to navigate monetary policy. What do you think is driving the markets in the near term? Is it more of the political pressure that's in the background?
I believe so. I mean, it depends on the market, actually. So if we take the Japanese bond market, the real driver this week was the announcement that both the opposition bloc, the newly formed opposition bloc, the Centrist Reform Alliance, and the ruling coalition are looking at food tax cuts. So that was a big fiscal concern, and that drove the markets. It very quickly unwound. Now, it's very difficult to maintain that sort of policy longer term because of the discipline that comes from the bond market. But then if we look at some other central banks, obviously, the Fed is front and center for investors. The credibility there was questioned a week ago. It was just a week ago that Fed Chair Powell made his video statement, and that drove the markets as well. So again, there's a disciplining factor there. So to truly undermine central bank credibility, I think it will be very difficult for any government. And potentially. So I think that in both those cases, there are slightly different drivers. One is a case of interfering in the Fed directly, and the other is really, it's about fiscal concern. So I think the two are very, very, very different. And I don't think we're in a situation of fiscal dominance yet, but it's a theme that's going to drive markets for some time, unfortunately.
And if we look at the long end, which we do have up on the board right now, when we just think about some of the fiscal concerns, we are seeing the 30-year back down ever so slightly. But is your expectation for that to hold, or are these nerves still going to be front and center, at least when it comes to globally some of the fiscal concerns?
I think it will probably hold it. There could be some triggers. Obviously, we have this constant news flow at the moment, which makes the bond market slightly more fragile. But also there's a structural supply and demand imbalance across the long end of a number of different countries. So I think this, and in some countries, it's a case of regulatory change, for whether it's Dutch pension reform, in Europe, life insurer regulation in Japan, and just fiscal concerns across Japan, Europe, US, and these have really been the key drivers across the long end. And what's interesting is this sort of spillover effect, and we saw that this week. We saw it last year in those bouts of bond volatility where one country has a particular story. So this week it was Japan, and yields went up 27 basis points. The rest of the market also went along. Not as much, but there is a spillover impact. And I think that fragility will remain for some time.
Right. Well, we'll see where this goes from here. Sree Kochugovindan, thank you so much for joining us there in London, Senior Research Economist at Aberdeen Investments. Appreciate your insights this morning. All right, coming up, can the Board of Peace lead to lasting calm in the region? We hear from Egypt's International Cooperation Minister next. This is Bloomberg. President Donald Trump says his Board of Peace initiative signed yesterday in Davos will promote geopolitical stability despite concerns from key allies. We spoke to Egyptian International Cooperation Minister Rania Al-Mashat on whether it will actually lead to long-lasting stability in the region. Take a listen.
It is in everybody's interests to have peace and security in the region. We're here in Davos talking about economic growth, prosperity, and that can only happen if there's peace and security in the region.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the reforms that Egypt has enacted over the last couple of years, because there have been plenty, including slashing subsidies, devaluing the currency by around 40%. How is this all being factored into the macroeconomic outlook for growth this year?
So I just want everybody watching to think of Egypt, neighboring, Gaza, neighboring Sudan, neighboring Libya, a very volatile region. Nonetheless, we have been growing by 5%. Tourism is at an all-time high. So there has been a lot of resilience in the Egyptian economy, and that has come on the back of very detailed reforms across the board. We started with macroeconomic reforms on the fiscal and monetary side. This was in March 24. But from then on, reforms related to industry, related to the business environment, related to the green transition, all of these reforms have been creating more credibility with investors, have been creating a conducive environment to attract private investments, both for Egyptians or Egyptian firms and foreign firms. So what we are doing currently with a new narrative is to say we're maximizing on the infrastructure, which has been invested in heavily over the past 10 years to basically open up for the second phase, more emphasis on high-value products, productivity, as well as tradables.
What other reforms can we expect?
Reforms is a continuous process, and given all the the evolving global picture and regional picture, countries need to be agile in order to create that resilience and grow. What's very important for us, growth and jobs, what's very important for us is to continue investments in human capital, be it on health and education. So all the fiscal space that is created and all the, the financing of the gap is going to be directed towards social spending.
That was Rania Al-Mashat, Egypt's International Cooperation Minister, speaking with us there in Davos. Let's take a quick look at where your markets are positioned for this Friday. It's been quite a week. As you can see there, U.S. equity futures a touch higher today, closing up on the day yesterday. Quite a bit of focus, though, is on what we did get overnight from Intel and their outlook, putting a bit of a damper on the AI tech trade. Eurostock 50 futures looking marginally lower on the day. Coming up, full throttle to fine-tuning. We hear from our interview with the Saudi economy minister as he confirms a shift in strategy. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Horizons Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump launches his long-awaited Board of Peace to work with the United Nations. But some global leaders fear he is trying to sideline the international body. Asian stocks rise and the dollar weakens against emerging market currencies as global investors seek a rotation out of U.S. assets amid policy unpredictability and geopolitical risks. Also ahead from Davos, we'll bring you our interviews with Saudi Arabia's finance minister, as well as the kingdom's economy and planning minister, plus the CEO of Mistral AI. It's just gone past 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates, 7:30 a.m. here in Johannesburg. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in for Jumana Bersechi. Happy Friday to you. It's been quite a week. If you take a look at where markets are shaping up for this Friday, perhaps it is a relatively positive start to the day amid thawing some of those tensions that we saw earlier in the week. Of course, started when we did hear about some of the concerns around Greenland seeming to have dissipated a little bit. If you take a look at where we're seeing U.S. equity futures marginally up to start the day, but the focus in extended trading has really been on what we heard from Intel, which gave a poorer than expected forecast for the first quarter, that potentially putting a bit of a damper on what was a reversal and a rally that we saw on Thursday for tech and the AI trade more broadly, after we did hear, of course, from NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang in Davos. So quite a bit of focus on global equity. Still, we are seeing a risk-on sentiment more broadly. The U.S. 10-year yield is unchanged, but we are awaiting the conference from Governor Ueda in Japan. We saw the BOJ go on hold earlier today. We'll have Winnie Xu dig into that a bit more. But the global bond sell-off earlier in the week has investors paying close attention to really what we are going to see from the BOJ and how that reverberates across markets. The U.S. 10-year yield at about 4.2449 there. Emerging market currencies stronger on the day against the dollar. That is notable, of course, as we continue to see a weaker dollar. I'm sitting here in South Africa, so it has been significant for me to point out that we did see the rand hitting a fresh 3-year high against the dollar. We're also seeing currencies such as the Brazilian real and the Colombian peso being stronger right now. So the MSCI EM currency index, they're up on the board. And spot gold still just over 0.4% there, stronger on the day. As you can see, just within inches of $5,000. And already on this Friday, we did see the yellow metal hitting another intraday record. So clearly a bid for safe havens is still in check. Also notable that silver is up on the day as well. Let's just bring you our terminal chart really quickly, and that is focusing in on the energy sector. We didn't have Brent on the board there, but Brent is heading for a 5th weekly gain. But still, as this chart is showing, we're seeing the gap between natural gas and oil in January seemingly to have closed. We saw natural gas falling actually in the U.S. session as it dropped about 14% over the past few hours. We're seeing frigid weather across much of the U.S. And seeing a number of traders then having to then cover some of the bearish positions that they did have prior to this specific moment on natural gas. But that is just a look at the correlation between natural gas and oil for January. Let's check in, though, on how markets in Asia are faring. Winnie Xu is in our Hong Kong studio, standing by for more. Winnie, I assume you're watching closely what's happening in Japan. Walk us through it.
Yeah, exactly. Morning, Jen. We are seeing a bit more development as we head into the afternoon session in Asia. Specifically, the Japanese yen still holding on to its losses, but you can see that on the shorter end of bonds, for example, the 2-year yield here is up 2 basis points, and that is most likely driven by how investors are seeing the Bank of Japan's rate decision as more of a slightly hawkish one. Even though, yes, we have the Bank of Japan keeping rates steady, it actually raised the inflation forecast. But like you mentioned, we will be very closely watching out for that pressure to come from Governor Ueda to happen in an hour or so. And the key focus will be how he addresses that recent bond sell-off and his tone around inflation and also rate outlook. Now, this is also very key as it just came after how Takaichi dissolved her lower house already and called for a snap election for February. Also, flip the board and take a look at the broader Asia market, because overall, yes, still in the green, because we are seeing that easing geopolitical tensions helping, and Korea still rising on that strong momentum. A bit weaker on the Chinese front. However, worth noting that the Chinese yuan here gaining and in fact rising for 9 straight weeks now. That's the longest of such streak since 2018, and that's coming after the central bank setting a stronger fixing rate, stronger than 7, first time since 2023. Back to you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Winnie Xu in Hong Kong. Great to have you on, Winnie. Thanks so much. Now, Bloomberg has learned Chinese banks' lending to the Gulf region jumped nearly threefold to a record $15.7 billion in 2025, with the bulk going to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Bloomberg compiled data shows banks from the U.S., UK, and Euro area together provided only about $4.6 billion to the Gulf last year. Now, let's stick in the region. Saudi Arabian officials are focused on wiser spending as the kingdom works to fine-tune its strategy after years of going full throttle. Speaking at Davos, Finance Minister Mohammed Al-Jatan says the focus is on optimal impact at the right cost as they move into phase 3 of the diversification agenda.
Maximizing the impact, learning from the mistakes, rewriting things that needs to be rewritten, reprioritizing, making sure that you take stocks of what really have you done well and double down on them, what needs adjusting and adjust and move on, but then staying the course.
We also spoke with Saudi Economy Minister Faisal Alibrahim about this.
For the Saudi economy, we project the non-oil growth, which is what we care about, to grow between 4.5 next year all the way to 6 and 5 the 2 years after that. And that's driven mainly because of Vision 2030. It's 10 years, almost to the week, to the month, since it was launched. We've sustained this transformation for over a decade because we have a clear target, a clear long-term challenge that we want to address. And we're adding drivers of growth to improve the complexity of the economy, decouple from a single commodity price, and improve resilience.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Saudi 2030 and the evolution of the vision. As you say, it's been a decade now, and a couple of months ago there was talk of perhaps postponing, delaying, cancelling certain projects. How are you deciding which projects to prioritize?
So I think the important thing is that overall, we want to achieve certain outcomes. The vision is a blueprint, a plan to help us get to these outcomes. You plan. Plans are a continuous process. And plans, when you feel that they're not giving you the right kind of results, when the data is sharing with you that they are not giving the same results, you can be agile. And agility is a way to keep I'd say progress on track. Consistency important, but agility keeps progress on the rails. And since start of Vision 2030, it was a big catch-up effort, catch-up on decades of untapped potential, and that required full throttle. It's important also to keep in mind that knowing when to go full throttle, knowing when to fine-tune is important. Ultimately, we want to deploy capital optimally in a manner that gives us the results we want. And we can see the results today. Non-oil growth, non-oil activities, 56% of our total real GDP at the end of last year. Non-oil activities have momentum. 74 out of 81 non-oil activities have grown at 5% or more over the last 5 years annually, 38 of them at 10% or more. That shows you that this is working, and we want to make sure it all counts.
So to recap then, you're going from evolving from full throttle to fine-tuning. Is that a correct characterization?
I think if you want to put a headline to it, you would probably attempt to use that one, but we went full throttle for the catch-up period. Certain sectors, certain subsectors, activities, certain, let's say, economic tools may require fine-tuning. And keep in mind, mega projects are essentially anchors for sectors that didn't exist in the past across a vast geography, 12th largest geography in the world, and with an evolving private sector that's growing more dynamic and more eager to tackle some of these scopes of work.
And for more, we're joined by Horizons anchor Jumana Bersetchi. Jumana, I mean, you heard it there, from full throttle to fine-tuning. That's quite a shift by the Saudis.
Yeah, I would say it's an evolution as opposed to a hard pivot or a shift. I'm just smiling because His Excellency Faisal Alibrahim was on to me for that headline. But I think it really does capture the sentiment right now in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I had an opportunity to speak to the minister, but I was also hosting a World Economic Forum panel with His Excellency Jadhan alongside His Excellency Faisal Alibrahim, World Bank President too. And we spoke a lot about Saudi's place within a world, obviously, that's becoming a lot more fragmented. And their theme was that Saudi has been relatively resilient. And you look at the non-oil growth sectors, which obviously is the key purpose of Saudi 2030 vision. Many of those sectors have been growing north of 5%, some of them growing north of 10%. The outlook for non-oil growth still remains quite robust, which is really what they're trying to underpin the economy with. But that being said, over the last couple of years, I think the Saudi budget has come under a lot of strain. We've talked about that. We've talked about lower revenues coming in, essentially because of lower oil prices. And so on the back of that, there has been some form of a mark-to-market in terms of what's achievable. And you heard there from the economy minister that they've evolved from going full throttle to sort of play catch-up on decades of misgrowth to now being a lot more cognizant about the sectors and the type of spending that they want to be allocating. Similar comments also from His Excellency Mr. Jadhan, the finance minister, and he said, we've learned from mistakes as well, and there are some endeavors that they'll have to reel away from or not devote capital to simply because it hasn't been as productive as they wanted it to. So they see this as part and part of the evolution of the development of Saudi 2030. It's been a decade now since Saudi 2030 was introduced to the world, and we're coming up to the end of it. At another point in the interview, I pressed the economy minister to see if maybe another vision would come through for the next decades, and he didn't completely deny that that was going to happen. But again, I think this tells us a lot about the sort of sectors that the kingdom is focused on in the future. In the past, it was a lot about those mega projects, the real estate, the infrastructure, and looking ahead, it's going to be more on industries like tourism, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing. These are industries of the future where they want to devote most of their capital.
Really fascinating stuff there, Jumana Bersetchi in Davos. Great work all week, Jumana. Hopefully you get some rest after what's been quite a busy week for you and the team. Thanks so much. And coming up, we hear from the CEO of South Africa's most profitable bank on why she believes the country will be able to achieve its 3.5% GDP growth target by 2030. That conversation is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. Congo is preparing to raise $750 million in its first ever Eurobond sale this April. The country aims to raise up to $1.5 billion selling foreign currency debt by the end of the year. The finance minister says the proceeds will be used to fund infrastructure projects with strong metals prices and accelerating economic growth expected to support investor demand. And white farmers in Zimbabwe are turning to the Trump administration in a bid to secure billions of dollars in compensation for land seized during farm invasions more than 2 decades ago. The farmers are working with a U.S. lobbying firm, Mercury, which has ties to President Trump, to press their case. The move comes after Zimbabwe failed to honor its agreement to pay $3.5 billion in compensation. Now back to South Africa. South Africa's most profitable bank believes the country will be able to achieve its 3.5% GDP growth target by 2030. FirstRand CEO Mary Vilakazi told Jumana Bersetchi that the South African economy is seeing cyclical improvements.
The third quarter print from a GDP point of view, I think was particularly strong. And I think we had a very good budget, medium-term budget, which again anchored the macro stability when it comes to the cooperation between our fiscal and monetary policies. So I think that was also something that we really welcomed from the business community. I think the Minister of Finance supporting the central bank's approach of lowering our inflation target.
Yeah.
You know, so that we think, you know, in around about 2028, we start seeing an economy that benefits from lower inflation, lower rates, and through the structural reform program, hopefully there is a GDP uplift, because I think our economy just has not been growing at the level that it should.
Yeah.
So a combination of those factors, I think, are providing good momentum for South Africa.
So from 2028, the president has a GDP growth target of 3.5% by 2030. Do you think it's achievable?
I think it's achievable. I mean, I think we are on about this year, at least for 2025 GDP growth, we're looking at about 1.4 to 1.5%, probably staying at similar levels for next year, improving a bit in 2028, getting closer to 2. But the key thing is, I think the implementation of the structural reforms should provide a kicker to a number of sectors in the economy. So I think if one looks at a GDP potential, you know, 2% is still way down. But it will have to take concerted steps in maintaining the momentum reform. I think beyond the political era in which the president is in, I think the next government is also going to have to commit to continuing with the program of reforming the economy. I think we've seen success now in energy, in transport and logistics, but there's still a lot more work to be done in the South African economy.
Mary, the diplomatic relationship between the United States and South Africa is still quite chilly, and we saw that around the G20 last year, towards the end of last year. There's still a lack of clarity on tariffs. How much downside risk does that pose to your outlook for South Africa in the absence of de-escalation?
So I think if you think about the period that's elapsed from Liberation Day, and I think from when South Africa had to deal with a lot of the challenges on tariffs, it's quite a long time. I mean, that actually those businesses have had to think about what do they do. So there's, I think quite a bit of the GDP growth negative impact that's come through in 2025. Where some of those businesses are carrying on. So if, in the absence of a trade deal, and I think being at the tariffs of 25%, some of those businesses seem to be getting by. So I think the more time elapses, the more we understand the impact of what happens. I mean, of course, it's not ideal. You would prefer a different situation. So yeah, I mean, I think if you look across the world, if you look at what Europe has to contend with, we're all having to navigate, I guess, really similar, uncertain political environment, and I think for South Africa there's merit anyway in I think in lying low, because really I think there are a number of problems that there are a number of challenges and opportunities in the South African economy that we can be focused on.
That was Mary Vilakazi, CEO of FirstRand, Africa's largest lender by market value. There, speaking with Jumana. Now, coming up, Mistral AI CEO says claims that Chinese AI technology lags the U.S. are a, quote, fairy tale. More from our interview next. This is Bloomberg. The CEO of Mistral AI, Europe's only large language model player, says claims that Chinese technology for artificial intelligence lagging is, quote, a fairy tale. In an interview with Jumana Bersetchi in Davos, Arthur Mensch said capabilities of China's open source technology is probably stressing the CEOs in the U.S.
It certainly is a growing topic, top of mind in the CEO's mind of enterprises, that their dependency to single providers when it comes to digital services might become a problem, and is not a great answer to the volatility that we observe in the world. So it's true in Europe, but it's also true outside of Europe. It's true in the US with certain accounts. It's true in Canada. It's true in the Southeast Asian region where we operate a lot as well. So we do see that the technology we've built and the differentiation of it, which is AI that you can customize and deploy wherever you want, is something that does resonate with the geopolitical events that we see.
Well, staying with the geopolitics, one of my colleagues spoke to the Anthropic CEO earlier this week, and on China, he thought that the idea of sending advanced chips there, and this is a quote, is crazy, and said it's a bit like selling nuclear weapons to North Korea. What's your view?
Well, I think I don't think this is true. It turns out that China does very well without NVIDIA chips. We've seen China rise on the open source front, and we have been at Mistral basically the spearhead of open source in the West, so outside of China.
Is China behind, though, the West?
China is not behind the West. I think this is a fairy tale. In AI, they are very much at parity. And the year ahead is going to be extremely interesting in that respect. We care about Europe maintaining its position, Europe maintaining its ability to train models, because we don't think that we should rely on open source Chinese models in very critical applications. So we need to be able to create our own models and to sell them to enterprises. So it's going to be very interesting, but it's a fairy tale that China is behind.
Let's talk about your own business. Do you have a revenue goal for this year?
Yeah, we do. We should cross $1 billion by the end of the year.
Okay, and in terms of capex spending, what are you factoring in?
We are about to do around $1 billion in capex spending this year on our Endeavor Mistral Compute, which is what we've done last year is to start and build our clusters and to fill some of the data centers we're renting with these clusters. The idea being that because we have the hardware, the software platform, because we know how to build the models and the applications on top, combining them with the GPUs is a way to get to a vertically integrated stack, AI cloud services that are competing with some of the other fully integrated providers.
That's Arthur Mensch, CEO of Mistral AI, speaking there with Jumana Bersetchi in Davos. Now, shares in Hong Kong's exchange declined on a Bloomberg report that China's securities regulator is considering tighter rules for mainland companies to sell shares in Hong Kong. The CSRC is said to have been deliberating on raising regulatory and compliance thresholds for H-share listings following an offshore fundraising boom, which raised concerns over deal quality. And if we just take a look at where we are seeing some of the gains, as we were just mentioning, potentially that will have some downside effect on Asian equities. So as you can see here on the board, U.S. equities marginally higher on the day, continuing from what was a stronger Thursday, a bit of a risk on appetite continuing from the thawing of relations between the U.S. and Europe from earlier in the week. Eurostock 50 futures looking to potentially start the day marginally lower. Though it has been quite a volatile week for Europe, so quite a bit to pay attention to there. And as you can also see on the board there, we are seeing the dollar a bit weaker, 0.3% weaker against the rand, but it's significant because the rand is hovering near its strongest level since 2022, about 16.08 there against the dollar. That is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa, though. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. Stick with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.